in a quaint neighborhood, where houses bore the marks of time with a certain dignified grace, the one at the end of the cul-de-sac stood apart. Its white paint flaked like aged skin, and the garden fence sagged under the burden of untold seasons. Yet, it wasn't the house's appearance that stirred a sense of disquiet in those who passed by, but rather an unspoken history that clung to it like the ivy on its walls. Many years ago, within the confines of this very house, young Jamie encountered an inexplicable phenomenon that would etch itself into the memory with indelible clarity. It was during an ordinary evening bath, a child's solitary sea voyage in the old clawfoot tub. The water, warm and embracing, frothed with bubbles under the soft glow of the bathroom light. Jamie, 7 and brimming with imagination, played amidst the suds, his knees peeking out like islands in a soapy ocean. But as the playtime waned and the water began its cyclonic descent down the drain, something extraordinary occurred. The rhythmic swirl of the water reversed, turning counter to its usual course as if repelled by some unseen force. And within the whirlpool's heart, an eye appeared. A solitary, sentient eye that held Jamie in a gaze more intimate than the bathroom's confining walls. The eye was a startling intrusion, a voyeur to the innocence of childhood bath times. It blinked once, deliberately, sending a shiver that transcended the warmth of the bathwater. Jamie's voice, ripe with impending terror, climbed to a crescendo, only to be stifled as the phenomenon dissolved before it could fully manifest, leaving the water to resume its typical whirl. Jamie's parents, summoned by the child's distressed calls, arrived to a scene devoid of oddity, with only the tail end of bubbles circling the drain. Despite Jamie's fervent explanations, the eye was dismissed as a fanciful creation of a child's active mind. The incident, subsequently buried under the detritus of growing up. The bathtub, once a vessel for adventure, became a place of unspoken fear, and showers a necessary shield against the unseen. Years cascaded into decades, and Jamie, now grown, found himself standing at the threshold of his childhood sanctuary, a home that now whispered echoes of absence. His parents had passed, leaving behind a tapestry of memories that draped over every picture frame, every piece of furniture, every creaking floorboard. The house, a keeper of the past, seemed unchanged, as if preserved in a bubble that the flow of time dared not disturb. It began subtly, with a gurgle, a familiar yet unwelcome sound that drew Jamie's attention towards the upstairs bathroom. Hesitant steps carried them across the threshold, where the air felt thick with the residue of bygone days. The bathroom had shrunk with time. Its once grand tub now seemed more akin to a basin, stained with the passage of time. Yet it was the drain that commanded attention, its dark maw encircled with rust, a silent sentinel to the room's history. As Jamie's eyes locked with the void of the drain, a whisper, as soft as a secret, unfurled in the air. It was a voice that shouldn't exist outside the confines of childhood nightmares, a voice that knew his name. The past had not been content to lay dormant. It stirred, reaching out from the depths where forgotten things dwell, seeking to reconnect with a promise made in innocence and a fear that had never truly faded. The whisper, laced with the musty scent of damp and decay, was an impossible sound, a disruption in the stillness that Jamie's adult mind struggled to rationalize. His name, spoken in that hushed tone, seemed to linger in the air, resonating with the buzz of the flickering overhead light. It wasn't possible. Drains did not speak, did not know one's deepest secrets, did not remember. Yet as Jamie stood there, the porcelain beneath his feet felt as if it pulsed with a heartbeat, a rhythm that echoed the one pounding in his chest. Memories, long since filed away into the archives of a mind, began to peel away from the walls of suppression. The eye in the drain, the whispered conversations of a lonely child, the inexplicable incidents that had followed, the shattered vase, the misplaced items, the nights filled with murmurs just beyond the veil of sleep. A surge of courage, or perhaps the desperate need for answers, propelled Jamie forward. He knelt by the tub, his face reflecting in the scant water left from a dripping tap. The reflection was a pale imitation, marred by the ripples, and for a moment, Jamie's heart skipped. Had his reflection just moved of its own accord? He shook the thought away, focusing on the task at hand. The voice had not spoken again, but the sense of presence, of being watched, had intensified. With trembling hands, Jamie reached for the faucet, turning it until the water cascaded into the tub, hoping to drown out what? The voice? The eye? The fear? The water swirled, obedient to the pull of the drain, and Jamie watched, half expecting another anomaly to present itself. But there was only the water and the sound of it rushing to escape the confines of the tub. No eye appeared. No further whispers disturbed the air. A sigh of relief was about to escape Jamie's lips when the water, now a whirlpool of considerable strength, began to slow, the level rising despite the open drain. Panic prickled at the back of Jamie's neck, a primal warning that something was very wrong. The water continued to rise, now spilling over the sides of the tub, flooding the tiled floor, and as Jamie stood to retreat, the water reached out, as if it had a will of its own. A wave rising to block the doorway. The room was filling up, the water an unrelenting force, and Jamie realized with a horror that defied logic that the drain was not letting go. It was consuming, swallowing the water into an abyss that should not exist in the confines of an old family home. And it was not just water that the drain sought. It was after something more, something it believed it was owed. The air was thick with humidity. Beads of moisture ran down the walls like tears as Jamie pressed against the door, the water now waist-high and climbing. He had to escape, had to find a way to sever this connection that had somehow bridged the gap between childhood fears and adult reality. But how does one fight a childhood nightmare that refuses to be left behind? How do you close the door on something that resides within the very pipes of your existence? Within the walls that once echoed with your laughter and your cries? With the water now swirling at his chest, threatening to silence them as it had his child self's screams, Jamie understood that this was more than just water. It was a culmination of every whispered secret, every unspoken dread, every shadow that had danced at the edges of his vision. The drain had been confidant, a silent keeper of a child's fears, and now it was time for those fears to be faced, for the whispers to be stilled once and for all. Jamie's mind raced, tracing the lines of every ghost story that might give a clue on how to combat an apparition that had crawled from the depths of his own past. Yet this was no specter that could be banished with sage or salt. This was a thing of pipes and echoes, of whispered pacts made in the innocence of youth. The drain, a chasm within the now turbulent waters, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It beckoned, not with the call of a siren, for there was no sweetness in its tone, but with the irresistible gravity of unfinished business. Jamie could feel the pull, a suction that threatened to draw in more than just the physical form. It sought to swallow his essence, to drain the very soul. In a fleeting moment of clarity, amidst the chaos of rising tides, Jamie's eyes fell upon the bathroom mirror, now steamed over, a canvas awaiting inscription. He remembered as a child how he would draw on the fogged glass with a small finger, creating worlds that vanished with the swipe of a hand. With a desperate breath, Jamie reached above the water's surface, his hand pressing against the mirror. The steam gave way under his touch, revealing a message written long ago, a message he had no memory of inscribing. "Speak your fears and set them free." It was a phrase from one of his parents' reassurances, the kind of thing offered to a child after a nightmare. But the words resonated now with a weight that tugged at the frayed edges of Jamie's resolve. There was no time for doubt, no space for second-guessing. As the water swirled around him, threatening to claim more than it ever had before, Jamie spoke. The words tumbled out, a litany of every fear he had ever confessed to the drain, every sorrow shared with the watery depths that had been a silent witness to a lonely child's life. With each admission, the water's fury seemed to abate, the level dropping incrementally, as if each truth spoken was a key turning in an unseen lock. The drain, once a gaping maw, now appeared to shrink, its pull diminishing, its hold on Jamie lessening. The room was calming, the chaos receding like a nightmare fading with the coming of dawn. The waters withdrew, begrudgingly, slipping away with a sound like a sigh of release. Jamie was left sodden, but standing, his reflection in the mirror now clear and unobstructed. He knew, as he caught his own gaze, that the ordeal was not yet over. This was but a reprieve, a momentary respite in a battle that had roots tangled in the foundations of his very being. The drain had been a conduit, a pathway to a place where childhood fears festered, waiting for the day when they would have to be faced in earnest. Jamie's breaths came in ragged gasps, a mix of relief and a dawning realization that this confrontation was only the beginning. The creature from the drain, the entity that had once whispered comfort to a frightened child, would not relent so easily. It had tasted the potential of a promise unfulfilled, a bond made in the naivety of childhood, and it would come again. But for now, Jamie was armed with knowledge, a weapon forged from the very fears that had once ensnared him. And with this knowledge, he would prepare. For when the whispers returned, as they inevitably would, Jamie would be ready to face not just the drain, but the darkness that lay beyond it.